my name is Megan. I'm a lactation consultant or an IBCLC with Milk and Honey Lactation and Education. And today for this Milky Monday, I wanted to talk about why breastfeeding doesn't always come naturally, even though it's a natural thing. So for that, I think we need to dive into a little history lesson. In the 1900s, all women breastfed their babies, unless you were a rich queen somewhere in a castle. It wasn't really until the Industrial Revolution that women were away from their babies and people started to be wet nurses, and then a need for formula came up. Um, After World War II, formula was promoted as the modern way to feed infants. It seemed to be more scientific and hygienic alternative to breastfeeding. And breastfeeding was actually kind of looked down on at that point. It was seen as primitive and inconvenient. It really wasn't until the 1960s when we started to have a growing body of scientific evidence proving the unique health benefits of breastfeeding. Breastfeeding rates hit an all-time low in the 1970s in the US, with only about 22% of women breastfeeding their babies. In the mid-late 1960s, a group called Lactation League International was formed out of a group of women that was just breastfeeding together in a park, that had other women coming up to them telling them that they wanted to breastfeed, but they didn't feel like they had support. And so they started a group that helped support other women. In the 1980s is when my profession as an IBCLC became a thing. And that was just because people started asking for more specialized support. Even with all of that, it wasn't until the 1990s that the American Academy of Pediatrics finally put out a statement saying that formula wasn't an adequate substitute for breast milk. It also wasn't until 1991 that there was really commercially available breast pumps for the general population to use in their home. In the early 2000s, now we're starting to see more support of practices that are going to help with breastfeeding being implemented in hospitals. There was something called a baby-friendly hospital initiative that was basically made to try and help improve hospital practices around breastfeeding support. In 2010 was the Affordable Health Care Act, which for breastfeeding required insurance companies to cover a breast pump for every birthing mother and access to specialized lactation care. This one really gets me. It wasn't until about 5 years ago in 2019 that it became legal in all 50 states to breastfeed in public. Okay, so now let's ask that same question again. If breastfeeding is so natural, why doesn't it come naturally? How could it? How can we expect to know how to do something that hasn't been done frequently around us? How would we know how to drive if the majority of people around us took a train everywhere? We wouldn't know the rules of the road, the basics of how a car should operate, or what your hands and feet should be doing when you're driving a car if you've never seen it. So it's the same with breastfeeding. Where do you put your hands, arms? What does a good latch look like, sound like, feel like? What does it look like at different stages of a baby's life? All of these things have not been very widely seen, felt, heard around us for a long time now. So how could we know what to do when we go to breastfeed a baby if we haven't been immersed in it, seeing our aunts, our sisters, our neighbors, our friends, etc., all doing it around us as we grew up before we had babies of our own? And that lack of kind of a tribe mentality where it's the cultural norm, that means that if you choose to breastfeed, you might require a lot of extra support from people that are specialized and trained in how to help people with that, to make up for that gap of what knowledge maybe was there 100 years ago. I think another thing we need to look at when we wonder why breastfeeding isn't coming naturally for most people is, let's just be honest, women having babies nowadays are not as young and not as healthy as they used to be. The average age of having children has increased over the last several years, and there's very few normal, healthy, physiological births happening. Some of these changes over the years can play a role in milk production for mom if she's got any health issues going on. We covered that in a Milky Monday several weeks. So go back and look at it. It's risk factors for low milk supply. And it can also play a role in the health of the infant and their ability to breastfeed without additional support if we don't have that normal, healthy physiological birth. When I worked in labor and delivery, I used to joke that the only babies I could trust were those that were natural labor, healthy mom, no induction, no epidural, no complications. Those babies, I never worried about them eating when and how they needed to because I knew that they would just do it. So hopefully that helps answer the question in some of your minds of why there's such a thing as a lactation consultant and why such a natural thing that our bodies were designed to do doesn't always come naturally for mom, baby, or both.
This is where I'm meant to be, I believe. And I feel the magic everywhere. It's all around us, it's in the